A scream in the dark. You jolt yourself upright, breath coming in ragged, sheets clinging to the sweat on your skin. Hey, hey, it's okay. A hushed and soothing voice. A hand rubs on your back. I'm here. It's alright. Your breath gets easier, and you take in the motel room around you. It's a hot night, and the stifling darkness is permeated only by a sickly light from the muted TV in the corner of the room, where a cheerful woman soundlessly expounds on the virtues of a new vacuum cleaner. A squeaky ceiling fan fights fitfully against the heat to no obey. The vertical window blinds click together faintly, but from afar the distant rumbling of cars on the highway permeates your ears. Are you okay? Another nightmare? Yeah, you mumble out. Do you want to talk about it? You lie together on the bed, half formed in the television's feverish glow. The hands continue to rub your back. You are silent for a long time, and then you begin to speak. There was something waiting for me outside that house. I was in an old childhood home. Again, but I was still grown up, and all the walls were all the windows, the floors to the ceiling. And there was something outside, just standing there, always outside. Where I was in the house, I could always see it. It looked like a man, but it wasn't. I was very tall and hairless, and I wore no clothes. Its pale white skin was wet with viscera, like a newborn's. Its eyes were all blue, all iris, no pupils. I would stumble around the house with my eyes closed, but I could feel its gaze on me all of the time. Its eyes were wet, too wet, like it had been crying for days on end. But it wasn't crying, it was smiling. Its teeth were big and gleaming, and its mouth took up half of its face at least. I knew it was there, waiting for me, that it couldn't come in the house, but I'd have to leave the house sometime, and when I did, it would be there, and it would gather me into its embrace, and the things it would do, then I knew, because it would whisper them to me at night, from just beyond the glass. My family could come and go as they'd please, and the thing would note their passing with a grin, and then go back to gazing at me, and only me. No one believed me that the thing was there, and for my own good my parents tried to get me to step out that door. But when they opened the door, it was standing there on the doorstep, arms outstretched, a grin wider than ever, and I fought and kicked and screamed until they let me go. They started to leave love tokens for me. Dead animals under my window, neighborhood cats and dogs, a raccoon, a couple of coyotes, all hanging from the trees on the lawn, big claw marks etched into their sides, festering with flies, and treating eyes looking up into the window. That's how my family would find me. The last token it would ever leave would be me, dangling in the yard, there amongst the rotting animals. So it told me. Its voice was very soft, almost gentle. Yet I knew somehow that all it needed to step beyond the threshold and enter my house and do what it wanted to me was to hear a word, but I didn't know what this word was. It could have been anything. My family would whisper to each other about my plight, and I'd scream them to shut up, because at any moment they might say the word and let it in. At any day they could say it. One day they would say it, and I couldn't sleep, and I couldn't think. This isn't real. This isn't real, I told myself. And then it hit me. It wasn't. It was a dream. This was my mind, and I could make it all go away. I opened my eyes and looked at the thing, and I told it to go away. But its smile grew widest of all, and it shot me a wink, and I knew then that I was dreaming too, and I didn't want it to follow me into the house. It wanted me to follow it out of the dream. And then you woke up, and then I woke up. What do you think the word was? I don't know. It doesn't matter anyway. It's just a soft voice from the darkness beside you. I'm here now, and I'm never leaving you. Static on the TV now. Is the hand that clutches you ever tighter, wet, and slick? Maybe, but it's a hot evening, the hottest of the year, that's all. Does the skin entwine with yours seem to gleam palely in the dark? It is only the light of the television. Do you smell a touch of rot and hear a buzzing of flies? Well, it is a crappy motel after all. Maybe if you close your eyes, nothing bad can happen. Maybe if you hold your breath, the next moment never needs to come. The Abandoned Village by Connection Fit 4696. My name is Jack, and I've been a professional traveler for 12 years now. A few months ago, a friend of mine mentioned an alleged abandoned village deep within the forest near our town. He estimated it would take about a week to reach the village. He believed that if the stories were true, it would be the perfect destination for me to explore and investigate the mysterious disappearance of the villagers. I was immediately intrigued and agreed to embark on this journey. The prospect of uncovering the truth about this village was thrilling. If the village did exist, I could possibly go down in history for discovering it and revealing its secrets. This could even cement my reputation as the best traveler out there. I was dreaming of fame, and after a week of traveling and camping out in the forest, was more than shocked, thrilled to realize that this village did indeed exist. I found myself standing on the outskirts, staring into this empty, eerie village. The center was quiet, with vines and foliage overgrowing the place, covering every crumbling building and home. Windows were shattered, and doors hung off their hinges, creaking in the soft wind. Streets were devoid of any sign of life, and the air was thick, as if the village itself were holding its breath. The sky above had turned grey, casting dark shadows all around me and creating a somber, haunting feeling. As I wandered through the empty streets, I noticed the remnants of what was a child's toy, abandoned in the middle of the road. A cart tipped over, with its contents spilled and rotting. And well, that looked like it hadn't been used in years. The village seemed to be frozen in time, a ghostly reminder of a life that once thrived here. Suddenly, and out of nowhere, I heard a faint scurrying sound, like someone was searching for something. My heart began to race as I followed the noise, leading me deeper into the city. The village grew louder, more frantic, the echoes of the walls of the empty buildings. My curiosity was tinged with the fear as I approached the source of the noise. There, in the shadows, I saw it. A creature unlike anything I had seen before. It had an alien, almost demonic appearance, with the skin that seemed to shift in colors in the dim light, almost like a cuttlefish, blending in seamlessly with its surroundings. Its eyes glowed with a menacing red, and its elongated limbs ended in sharp, claw-like daggers. It moved with a disturbing grace, its head constantly twitching as it searched for something. Me? It couldn't be. I'd only just arrived. I quickly ducked behind a dilapidated wall, trying to steady my breath. The creature's movements became more frantic and erratic as its guttural growls filled the air. I could hear it getting closer, its claws scraping against the ground. I peeked out from my hiding spot and saw the creature's eyes scanning the area, narrowing as it sensed my presence. The fear was unbearable. My heart pounded in my chest as I tried to remain as still as possible. No movement, no breath. The creature was now just a few feet away, its breath hot and foul, a reeking decay, an odor like nothing I'd smelled and nothing would ever smell again. I could see its shadow growing larger on the ground, inching ever closer and closer as it crept up behind me. The air around me felt thick with tension, every second stretching into an eternity. Just as it seemed the creature would find me, a sudden noise from a tree limb in the opposite direction would distract it. A sharp crack of a branch echoed through the still air, causing a whip of the creature's head in the other direction, and it darted erratically towards the sound. Its swift, predatory movements were both terrifying and mesmerizing. This unexpected diversion gave me the precious seconds I needed to make my escape. I sprinted through the village, not daring to look back. My legs burned with exertion, my lungs felt as if they were on fire, but I couldn't afford to slow down. The enraged howls of the creature echoed behind me, growing louder and louder, more desperate with every ounce of my strength. But I moved forward, dodging obstacles and leaping over debris. The streets now felt like a treacherous maze, each turning and cornering, and a potential trap could be laying behind each one. But I had no choice. I had to keep running, hoping against hope that I could outrun the nightmare that pursued me. The village seemed to stretch endlessly, as if I had walked for hours to get to my start, each step feeling like it took me further back into the nightmarish labyrinth. The creature was gaining on me, its presence a constant, terrifying weight at my back. I could hear its claws pounding the pavement behind me, each thud reminding me just how close it was getting. As I ran, I caught a glimpse of more creatures, lurking in the shadows, their eyes glowing with the same malevolent light. They watched me with a predatory interest, their forms shifting and blending with the darkness. The village was infested with them, teeming, and as I realized with growing horror that I'd stumbled into a nest of these nightmarish, horrible beings, panic surged through me, threatening to overwhelm my senses, but I forced myself to stay focused. I locked in, and I got it done. I knew that there was one wrong move, one moment of hesitation, and it would be my last. The narrow, winding streets seemed to close in around me, each corner hiding new dangers. My only hope was to keep moving, to stay one step ahead of the terror that hunted me. As more creatures lunged out and began to chase me, all I could hear was my heart thumping in my chest, a feeling as though it was about to explode. Finally, I reached the edge of the village, and I plunged deep into the forest, the creature's cries fading into the distance as it nor took a step further. The dense trees provided a temporal refuge, and I didn't stop running until I was sure I was far enough away. I collapsed against a tree, grasping for my breath, my body trembling with exhaustion and fear. Out of breath, trembling, I made it back to civilization. I warned everyone I knew and everyone I met to stay away from that abandoned village, telling them of the horrifying things I had encountered, the creatures. The village was abandoned for a reason, and I knew I was lucky to make it out alive, barely at that. The tale of my harrowing escape spread quickly, serving as a grim reminder of the dangers that lurked in that forgotten corner of the world. Instead of fame, I got trauma. Stars by Creepy Possum. My name is Liam. One of my most vivid memories from childhood is a walking trip to a local university when I was 5.5 years old. It was late July. Summer was nearing its end. It was my final summer before I was to start kindergarten. Only one more month. I was scared to go. I'd been spending most of my summer days at my aunt's house with my younger brother, while my parents worked their day jobs. Her house was just around the corner from the university. You couldn't see it directly from the house, but if you walked about 4 houses east to the end of the block and looked southbound, there it was, at the edge of crosswalk 5 or 6. It was a small Quaker university, or at least it was founded 100 years prior, meaning mostly Quaker. This mostly consisted of a single large tower building, but a few smaller satellite buildings scattered around the feet of the larger one. The central tower of the university had an interesting look. It was constructed from red bricks and capped in slate blue, with the elaborate arched windows trimmed in pale limestone, almost deliberately archaic-like. It looked like a castle from a fairy tale story. My aunt had a son and a daughter, my older cousins. She was going into 5th grade, I think. He would have been about 12, going into maybe 7th grade, maybe 8th. They had been attending summer school at the time, or sort of a afternoon summer program. Nobody remembers the exact details, but it was hosted by the university. And the day in my memory was their last day to attend. They were going to eat lunch and then have a little celebration, and they could invite a couple friends over. My aunt thought it might be fun for me and my brother to go with them that afternoon. I could see, or at least get some idea, of what a classroom looked like, how grown-up school looked. Maybe I wouldn't be scared to go to kindergarten afterwards, so we agreed. It's funny how much our perception of time changes over the years. As 5.5 years old, my cousins practically seemed like adults to me. Even the idea of being as old as they were seemed so far off and unattainable. We, my younger brother and I, my 2 older cousins, and I left the house in a jaunting mood around noon and trekked on foot over to the big tower building so we can make it to the cafeteria for lunch by 12:30. I remember the cafeteria room, folded, unusual beige school cafeteria tables standing upright in their holds along the walls. 2 long tables unfolded and laid out for maybe a couple dozen children. The green, grey, almost olive green floor, tile overlaid with those greyish speckled streak patterns you see in tiles sometimes. The large brick walls painted pale brown, the lovely natural lighting, strips of bright midday sunlight slanting through enormous, tall windows, with partially closed blinds on either side, lighting up specks of dust in the air like fairy magic, in a room that was otherwise pleasantly shaded, an enchanting mix of light and shade that really did seem to soothe me. At some point, the younger of my cousins had brought us some boxes of chocolate milk on a tray. I remember her reassuring me that it'd be like going to school, because I'd get to drink chocolate milk every day for lunch. I think it actually did make me feel better. I remember nothing of the actual celebration, as it were, other than that at some point it involved a tour of the tower. At certain points we were given a little bit of time to explore. Somewhere on the 6th floor, there was a small corner exhibit about the early Renaissance navigation in the Americas and the West Indies. I remember very clearly two things in that exhibit. One was a reproduction of Arundel, an Earth globe created in 1491, the year before Columbus's voyage into the Caribbean. I can't remember if it was old enough to understand the significance at the time, but looking back on the memory when I was older, it gave me the creeps. The Arundel was well produced, definitely pieces of cartography, probably made with quite a bit of confidence, and two entire continents were simply missing, only vast dark ocean in their places. The only thing I remember clearly was a section of the floor painted with stars and constellations of the night sky, as seen from the northern hemisphere. I recognized the Northern Star and the Big Dipper. I remember looking at it for quite a very long time. So long that everyone around me must have wandered off, because eventually I was alone, wandering the space exhibit, eyes fixed on the stars in the floor. The constellation map must have really only been a few feet long, giving way after a short distance to some dingy black formica tiles flecked with white spots. But I don't think my 5.5-year-old brain clocked that the stars had ended. I thought as I stepped on the tiles that I'd simply wandered farther into deep space, where no one on Earth could see or had ever been. As I followed the pathway of the tiles, I began to obsess over the specks, trying to find my own patterns and faces in them. No pattern were ever fully congealed. I felt like I was trying to recognize wisps of shapes under 1,000 feet of dark water. I was a lost explorer in an ocean under a strange star, far away from anything I knew. After a few minutes, I came to a door, offset from the others, with a paint-over handle that looked like it hadn't been used in years. There was a name set into the dusted metal slide mount in the wall beside the door. A former professor who was no longer there. Transferred to another university? Or retired? Or dead, perhaps? I never found out. I don't recall anything about the name, other than it was female. The door was unlocked, and I went inside. I guess I thought I'd find more stars. The interior of the room was unattended and dirtier than the other rooms, and it was small, smaller than any of the other classrooms I'd seen. There were no stars on the floor. It was made of old, dark wood. It looked like an office. There was a desk, some shelves and books. Only one thing seemed out of place. Squatting in the center of the room was an old tripod and a dilapidated camera covered with dust. Probably didn't work anymore. I turned to face where it was pointing. Suspended on the wall in front of it was a worn, unframed photograph. It was glued to an old piece of construction paper. On the photograph was my face, 5.5 years old, gazing back at me, frozen, contorted in agony. In the background of the photograph, I could make out the features of this same room. An unseen hand drove something that looked like a long screwdriver through my ear into my head. There was a small window on the opposite of the wall, covered by a dirty white curtain, except for one sliver from which a thin ray of pale light shot diagonally across the room and back out into the formerly tiled hallway. The light wouldn't go near the photograph. I don't remember how I felt seeing that image. I just remember staring at it, just for a moment, very confused, and then turning back in silence out of the room to go find my cousins and my brother again. When I found them, I said nothing about what I'd seen. We were back at my aunt's house by 2 o'clock, and I played in the backyard, probably watched TV. I did normal things. At what must have been 3:15 that afternoon, I was sitting on the floor in a brown carpeted den at the back of the house alone. I don't remember what I was doing. Probably watching something about animals on the TV that no one else wanted to watch. On one side of me, I could see the vague shape of my brother through the screen, and the glass doors that opened to the backyard, doing something or something else. I'm not sure what it was, what he was quite doing, but he was by the back shed. On the other side of me was the entryway to a thin, stretched of dining room, I guess you could call it, which was little more than a painted white booth set into the wall under a long window, leading into the kitchen and then into the middle of the house. I could hear someone rooting around in the kitchen, in a cabinet under the sink. I got up and wandered slowly that way, wondering about the noise. Sun from the side window bathed the dining room in light, so bright it made my cheeks hot. But the kitchen was shaded, cool and blue, the curtains drawn shut. I was glad to be in there. I crested the corner to see who was making the noise under the sink, and hunched between the two wide doors was a woman, but I had never seen her before. Her sleeves were rolled up past her elbows. She was reaching down through a hole in the floor that was larger than she was. I could see nothing but black down there. She looked like she was searching for something, or she'd found something and was trying to reach it. When she noticed I was looking at her, she pulled her hands out, sat up, and smiled. "Hello, little lost explorer," she said affably. I asked her who she was. She told me she'd found some new stars for me, that she knew how much I liked them. If I wanted, I could take them home and hang them on my wall. I could eat them up and keep them in my heart until they were ready to shine. She beckoned into the black hole. I held my breath and leaned in closer to see what she was pointing at. All I remember next was my entire body going black, and then waking up to a white light in a hospital bed. My aunt told me that I'd gotten into a plastic tub of nickel-sized drain cleaning tablets under the sink. The ones with those blue and white speckled patterns, and eaten a handful of them. She had come home from gardening outside around 3:25 to find me convulsing on the floor. I didn't die, obviously. Somehow I was extremely fortunate, and none of the caustic foam welling up from my esophagus spilled over into my lungs. I'd also hawked up most of the pills before they'd even made it past my mouth, before they could do too much damage. Burning in my mouth and esophagus was agonizing for weeks, and inconvenient for a few months, but ultimately I recovered. I still have scarring in my esophageal lining and at the back of my throat, and occasional bouts of pain where I feel like my entire throat is a giant canker sore, and I can only eat liquid foods for a week or two. But for the most part, that afternoon is just a memory. When I asked about it years later, everyone who was with me that day told me that they had no idea what to make of what happened. When I came home from the university, I'd seemed completely normal. I'd eaten a snack, I'd played with the other kids, I'd rambled over in excitement over a show about animals that I wanted to record for later, as I often did. Less than 2 hours later, my aunt had come into the kitchen to find me nearly dead on the floor after swallowing half a tub of cleaning tablets. No one had been aware of anything wrong with me, other than that I had been scared to go to kindergarten, which most of the kids my age were. I myself cannot offer any opinion about what happened, because I cannot recall a single thing about my life before that afternoon, not even fragments, not even the morning of the day. It isn't that unusual to have your first memory at least 5.5, certainly not enough to be concerning to anyone else, but it's always bothered me. Most people can recall at least a few fragments of memories as far back as 2 or 3, and most people have at least somewhat detailed memories as early as 4. Yet my sense of self seems to have awakened instantly and all at once, the precise moment that that pale red and blue university tower around the corner from my aunt's house came into view at noon on that hot, sunny day in July. A month before I started kindergarten, as if the tower itself had summoned me into existence as I currently experience it. My brother once joked that the pills might have given me brain damage. It's a morbidly amusing thought, but it doesn't really make sense. My memory ever since has been perfectly fine, and the hospital reports from that afternoon said nothing about any damage to my brain, just my mouth and esophageal lining. I've never been able to escape the feeling that something from before that afternoon was deliberately carved out of me. I think back to the replica of the Arrow de Feu, back to the unsettling feeling that comes over me whenever I think about it. Seeing the Americas, my home, simply missing from the world. I think back to that photograph. But oddly enough, this isn't a story about childhood trauma. Well, not exactly. I remember from that point forward going into kindergarten with a sense of hope and confidence that I hadn't had before. It was as if I had shown some resilience or spirit in the ordeal with the tablets, which had convinced someone or something that my existence was worth continuing, like I'd passed a test. From that afternoon onward, I had complications from eating the cleaning tablets, notwithstanding a perfectly normal and happy childhood. I never saw or even dreamed about that woman under the sink ever again. My only wisp of a connection to anything about my life before the afternoon is a recurring dream I had when I was probably 6, maybe 7, or it might have been 8. In that dream, I was much younger, preschool. Well, it's complicated. I never experienced the dream directly as my preschool self, but as seen as an unseen older child, observing my younger self as if I was watching him in a movie. We stood in front of my yard on a clear hot near the end of summer. The porch lamp cast us in a pale yellow-orange. Cicadas trilled their very last song. The last of the June bugs thudded dumbly against the porch walls. Another boy, one of my friends in preschool, stood with us. He was leaving, and we would never see him again. His mum had to go somewhere. I don't know where. My younger self made up his mind to fashion sort of a doll or likeness of this boy out of what I don't know, but he would do it so well that nobody would be able to tell the difference, and when he finished, he realized the body would be too heavy to take with him to school. So the following Monday, he decided he would just carry the head. I followed him. His decision was unpopular. His classmates complained again and again that the teeth would clack and grind when the head moved. It seemed to produce a slow but endless supply of a moist matter that seeped out of the surface from the bottomless pit inside of it. Everyone complained about the smell. The teachers complained when they had to pause their activities several times a day to send his classmates to the bathroom to throw up. They complained every time that they had to sweep away the tiny brown sesame seed-like eggs that would fly out of its hair like popcorn onto the floor. Parents complained that they would never get the smell out of their children's clothing. My younger self took offense to these complaints, responding with anger. He would defend his friend as if the boy were really there, still whole and one and the same with the doll. As if the other children, the parents and the teachers were bullying him. This seemed to continue for months, for all the sense of time that I had in this dream, when really I have no idea. That's all I remember. I must have been no older than 8 when this dream stopped, and I've never had it since. Many, many years later, about 4 years ago as I write this, I was cleaning out my grandmother's attic after her death, and I happened upon an empty out of the contents of a box, a big box of old papers that I think my grandmother had originally been storing for my mother. And at the very bottom was a small collection of journal entries and outpatient records from a year that I would have been preschool aged. Now, I don't think either my mother or my grandmother had intended to preserve any of them. They seem to have just been buried inadvertently under the piles of junk over the years until they were forgotten. I was in them. My parents had taken me to a child psychologist because of a bit of obsessive behavior that had begun to concern them. I had a stuffed animal, and apparently it was true that I'd kept it because it reminded me of a boy I'd been close with in preschool. His mother had worked at the university. Something had happened in regarding the mother, and he moved away. The stuffed animal was a pale blue rabbit hugging a bright yellow crescent moon. But at the time, I didn't understand the difference between the moon and the stars, so I kept calling the crescent moon a star. After the boy left, I'd kept the stuffed animal for about a year, until it started to reek and fall apart. I took it everywhere, with me. At some point it had fallen into the trash, and some trash water had soaked into it and made it mouldy, but I absolutely refused to let anyone throw it away. I screamed bloody murder anytime someone suggested washing it too, because I was afraid it would fall apart. I'd become violently inconsolable at the idea of parting with it, or letting anyone do anything to it. It was all behaviour that, though on the extreme side, was not especially unheard of from a preschooler, even an older one, to be honest. I wasn't only truly stricken, or at least confused by one thing. It was a bit from one of the only surviving parts of an interview transcript between me and the child psychologist. Near the end of the series of counselling sessions, the psychologist asked me a question that had probably been asked about 1,000 times before. How long was I going to keep carrying the stuffed animal around? This time, I'd taken a few moments to think of the answer. Then reluctantly, I said, I didn't know. I was too afraid to stop until I had permission to do so. Permission from whom? Asked the psychologist. Again, I didn't answer for a long time, gathering the courage to speak the words aloud. I said that not only did I have no idea, I didn't know if I would recognize permission when I got it. I wasn't even sure if I was meant to stop. The only thing that I was sure that I couldn't stop without permission. There was a bit more back and forth, in which my demeanor seemed to change drastically for the worse, and my answers were less forthcoming, until finally I said, I hope I do get to stop soon. A pause, and then, I really hate having to look at it. The transcript ended, or at least nothing further was preserved in the box. I spent the rest of that day searching every box of papers in the attic for more information, but I found nothing. Nothing other than a conviction as strong as ever that something about my life before age 5.5 had been carved out of my memory. By whom or what, I had no idea. But whenever I ask anyone who might know more, they wouldn't say anything. Maybe they didn't know anymore. Maybe it doesn't matter. Or maybe it's better not to know.